The last thing I remember is looking up and seeing those RAF Typhoons. When I heard them screaming up ahead, I thought, geez, I'm glad they're on our side.
The Hawker Typhoons are easily recognizable, and they were amongst the best ground attack aircrafts in World War II. But initially they were plagued with problems, and their development was anything but smooth. So let's see the origins and development of these interesting planes. The Hawker Hurricane was a very successful design, and during the Battle of Britain it was more numerous than the Spitfire and was the backbone of the RAF fighter force. But just as soon as it entered service, the team at Hawker, with the lead of Sidney Cam, immediately started working on a new fighter, which would be the Hurricane's successor. There was no formal request from the government for a new plane, but it was assumed there will be one soon. And so it happened not long after. The Air Ministry issued specification F-18/37, which called for a single-seat fighter armed with 12 7.7mm machine guns, a maximum speed above 400 miles an hour, and a service ceiling of 35,000 feet. The new fighter had to use one of the new 24-cylinder engines in development, either the Napier Sabre or the Rolls-Royce Vulture. Since Hawker already had the plans for a new plane, they made two versions for each engine proposed. The two planned aircraft was quite similar, one built around the Napier engine, the other around the Rolls-Royce one. They were initially just called N and R models. Though the R model initially used ventral radiator placement, soon it was moved forward to the chin, similarly to the N variant, as it was found the ventral placement was not optimal for the planned high speeds. The Napier-powered variant was to become the Typhoon, and the Rolls-Royce-powered one the Tornado. The Air Ministry accepted Hawker's proposals in April 1938, and in August one prototype was ordered from both designs. The work on both versions of the aircraft started in parallel, but since the Vulture engine was ahead of the Sabre, the Rolls-Royce powered prototype flew first in October 1939. Then after the first flight it was found the ventral radiator placement was not optimal, so it was moved forward to the chin on the second prototype. The first Napier engines had been delivered only in December 1939, so the prototype of the N version first flew in February 1940. Both prototypes showed promise. They were easy to fly, but they both had initial technical problems. Because of the bigger Vulture engine, the Tornado was 12 inches longer than the Typhoon. And meanwhile the latter was shorter because of the Napier engine was more compact. The engine was mounted so close to the wings it caused severe vibrations. Sadly, not long after, in May the same year, the ministry decided that all resources should be put towards the established aircrafts, the Hurricane, Spitfire and the main bomber types. So the development of Hawker's new planes ground to a halt for nearly a year. The next prototype flight happened a year later in May 1941. Meanwhile, during this time, the Air Ministry gave an order for 1,000 aircraft to Hawker, split between the Typhoon and the Tornado. But in July 1941, the Rolls-Royce Vulture engine project was cancelled. It had too many problems and the Merlin engines were getting the same level of performance as well. The cancellation of the Vulture engine meant the cancellation of the Hawker Tornado as well, and left the Typhoon as the sole project to replace the Hurricane. But the problems with the Typhoon were not over. By design it had very thick wings to mount the armament and provide enough space for the fuel tanks, but as it turned out, these caused a significant amount of drag. The aircraft barely managed to get above the requested 400 miles an hour speed at 20,000 feet. And above that altitude its performance was disappointing. But the performance problems were the smaller ones. The early Typhoons often suffered from engine troubles and structural failures, and had a tendency of the whole tail breaking off in dives if the speed exceeded 500 miles an hour. These problems were found out when the Typhoons were rushed into service just a few months after their test flights in September 1941 to counter the Focke-Wulf 190 fighters. Many Typhoons were lost in the first year of their service, and most of them not to enemy fire. The investigation found the failure of the tail on the aircrafts were caused by weak joints and metal fatigue because of the tail flutter. To counter this problem, the rear fuselage was strengthened and riveted steel plates were attached. The main variants of the Typhoon were the 1A, built with 12 machine guns, the 1B variant with 4 20mm cannons, the NF-1B, which was a single night fighter conversion experiment, and the FR-1B, a reconnaissance conversion. The canopy of the Typhoons also changed from the early to the late models. Initially they featured similar car doors like the P-39 fighters and a metal rear section. The second variant kept the overall layout but added a see-through rear canopy section to improve visibility. Finally, the late model Typhoons featured a rear sliding full bubble canopy. Now let's see the general technical specifications of the Typhoon 1B variant. The Typhoon was a very big plane. It had a length of 31 feet 11.5 inches and a wingspan of 41 feet 7 inches. Its empty weight was 8,840 pounds and the maximum takeoff weight was 13,250 pounds. The plane used an APS Sabre 24-cylinder liquid-cooled engine, which developed 2,180 horsepower. With this engine, the maximum speed it could reach was 422 miles an hour. The Typhoon had a range around 500 miles when carrying bombs, or around 1,000 miles if equipped with drop tanks. Its service ceiling was 31,800 feet. The main armament consisted of 4 20mm Hispano cannons mounted in the wings. The secondary armament could be 8 RP-3 rockets, or 2 500-pound, or optionally 2 1,000-pound bombs. As we mentioned before, the Typhoon was pressed into service in late 1941 to counter the low-level attacks of the Luftwaffe against the RAF airfields. Though it had worse climb rate and high-level performance than the Hurricane, at low levels the Typhoon performed quite well and enjoyed success against the enemy fighters. That is when the engine or structural problems didn't occur. Another problem they encountered was that the shape of the Typhoon somewhat resembled the Focke-Wulf 190. And so to not get shot by their own air defense, they started to use white stripes under the wings, similar ones to the D-Day invasion stripes. Nonetheless, by the end of 1942, most of its early problems were fixed or partially fixed. They became more reliable and it was found they performed very well in certain tasks. Actually, the Typhoon was the only RAF aircraft capable of catching the Focke-Wulf 190 at low altitudes. It was around that time, at the end of 1942, the Allies started to use the Typhoons more and more in offensive roles, to fly over France, strafe airfields, trains and other targets, and they were quite successful in this role. So when in 1943 the RAF was looking for a ground attack aircraft, the Typhoon seemed like the logical choice. It had good low altitude performance, a very strong engine and a sturdy airframe, which prevented it to be a top fighter aircraft but allowed it to be modified to carry bombs and rockets for its new role. The bombs were equipped on some Typhoons from late 1942, the rockets were only added about a year later. In the months leading up to D-Day, the Typhoons flying from south of England attacked countless targets in France, ships, bridges, railways and communication centers. Some of them were used in covert operations as well, when they attacked German headquarters based on intelligence reports going after the German officer meetings. During and after the Normandy landings, the Typhoon proved itself to be one of the best Allied ground attack aircraft, with its bombs and rockets. The RAF set up close communication with the ground troops, and usually had a patrol of Typhoons available to call on if the troops needed air support. Though there are different opinions on how effective the rocket attacks actually were, the Allied and German witnesses stated that the Typhoon's rockets knocked out German tanks fairly often. Their 20mm cannons were also effective against lightly armored troop carriers and support vehicles. They took part in every major operation in Western Europe. At Arnhem, at Mortain, they covered the troops at the Rhine crossing to Germany and were used until the end of the war, and they were always a welcome sight for the ground troops. But when the war ended, they were quickly removed from service. Their place was taken by the faster and newer Hawker Tempest, which started as an evolution of the Typhoon, but then it received its own separate name. We will look at the Hawker Tempest in a separate video later. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.